Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art of Raising Children for Greatness group. If you're new to the group, a special welcome. We're glad to have you. This is a small private group, so we can kind of say what we want for the time being. I'm sure Facebook is still listening, but anyway, it's a private group because this isn't a discussion group or it's not an opinion group on education. It's where we talk about the Art of Raising Children for Greatness philosophy, which is going to be 5 books. The first one was Revealing School. Revealing School has actually become really popular all of a sudden. I don't know if it's all the crazy unrest. I think people are really starting to question the entire system. And school's a major part of that. And a lot of people are deciding whether they want to homeschool. And so Revealing School has become really popular. If you haven't read it, even if you're homeschooling, you should read it. It'll impact the way you homeschool. Just to know how the philosophies of public education are horrific, don't work. The second book in the series, which just came out, I guess it's been 6 months, that is Education. Education will, this Revealing School tells you what not to do and what's broken about the public school system. Education tells you how to educate academically, how to set this up, how to educate your children for greatness. And we say for greatness, we're talking about in the mold of the elite prep schools. That's not just some generic slogan we came up with. We're talking about educating children so that they can achieve their goals at the highest levels. Okay, that's education. The good news is, very shortly, character's coming. So character, I actually finished writing the last little bit last night, and most of it's been edited. We have 3 chapters left to edit. That means hopefully by the end of the month, it'll be done. We're going to wait. After that, you put the book aside. You don't look at it for a month. You read it one more time just to make sure you didn't miss anything. And then it'll be published soon. So hopefully it'll be by the end of the summer. That book will be out. That book is twice as big as education because character is twice as important as your academic education. Character is king when it comes to an elite education. All right, so today we're going to continue our talk. We had a question from Sharon before. She said, okay, how do you teach in a way? She's very concerned because I talk about this in the book. How there's this an anomaly where you have these kids that go through 13 years of public education. Some are in college, and they still don't know anything. There was just another video I was watching today. They were asking, it was really funny. They were actually interviewing some teachers, and they were like, hey, when was the Revolutionary War fought? And the teachers didn't know. And it's not because they're not studying it. It's not because they're not educated. It's because they haven't retained any of it. This is the same thing with, there was a senior. He was going around his graduating class. He's asking all these other seniors basic questions like, who was the first president? Or can you name a country besides the United States? Or something like that. And they couldn't answer anything. So you say, how is that possible after 13 years of education? How is that even possible? And we talked about how that's possible. First of all, the first thing we talked about was layers. They don't teach in layers, they teach in blocks, which means you never see a subject. All of a sudden you're overwhelmed with that subject, and then you go on, you never see that subject again. So you're just totally, you're ignorant, you're overwhelmed, and then slowly you just forget all of it. And within a year or two, you've just brain dumped. It's lost. You can't recover it from your memory. The second thing we talked about was learning pyramids. You can watch that video last week. It talks about how people learn. It has to do with passive and active learning. And this is like the only learning theory style or whatever you need to know. It's passive and active. Today we're going to talk about probably the most important, what really sets Blue Man apart in our vision for what we want to become as a company, and that is teaching the essential. And if you've read the book, hopefully you have, you'll know what I'm talking about, but I just want to reiterate it today. And this is so important because so often when you teach these block lessons, you're teaching so much material, and so much of it is irrelevant. It's just fun details. I give the example in the book of when I was a little kid, we studied the Pilgrims and the Indians in kindergarten. And it ended up being a work study in corn, maize. And so we made like corn art because the Indians, gave us corn or something. So we made corn art and corn dishes and drew pictures of corn or something. Everything was about corn. And then at the end, we dressed up like pilgrims and Indians, and we had like a musical. So absolutely not essential. Corn is not why we remember the Pilgrims and the Indians. That's not part of history. It's just irrelevant. It's just like a fun fact. It's a trivial pursuit. It has nothing to do with why the Pilgrims are historical figures. The one thing I didn't learn was about the Mayflower Compact, which would be essential. And when you take all that non-essential, not just unessential details, and you mix it in, like when you're learning about George Washington, you'll learn about where he lived and how he grew up and all that stuff. Like that's cool. That's interesting if you really want to study that guy. But that's not essential. That's not why George Washington is a historical figure. And when you mix all that other non-essential details in with the essential, kids kind of lose their way. There's so many details they can't distinguish the importance of knowing George Washington's birthday or where he grew up. And the fact that he was the first president, or he was, fought as a general, or I wasn't a general, maybe he fought, I should say. He was an officer. I don't know what his rank was in the Indian War, the French and Indian War. So those are like essential details. All the other stuff, where he lived, what plantation he had, all that stuff, that's just interesting. It's not essential. And you have to distinguish between those. Otherwise, there's too many details, and what kids will really remember is just the kind of the fun, interesting stuff. Like, I remembered, it just cemented in my brain that George Washington had wooden teeth. I remember that. I remember he wore a wig. I think I do remember he was the first president. But after that, I didn't really remember anything from the school days about George Washington, except he was kind of like one of the guys who kind of helped found the country. But I didn't really know any other essential details about him. So as we talk about teaching the essential, by just limiting yourself to the essential nuggets, your kids will be able to remember it because there will be less to remember. The other thing about essential is that it should be relevant to our everyday lives. It should be actually useful in some way, okay? So, all right, the fact that the Indians ate corn has nothing to do with our lives. Kids can never use that. It's totally non-essential, so they'll just forget about it. Now, the Mayflower Compact is kind of interesting. It is tied into our own Constitution. It was the first, document of government in this country, and because it's tied into our Constitution and stuff, like it is relevant in that sense. Another example, moms get really creative. They think they're going above and beyond. I remember this one, a local group or something was doing the settlers. They were going to learn about the settlers, and they were going to do a day of butter churning because the settlers butter churning. So they're going to dress up like the settlers and they're going to do butter churning. That has nothing to do with the history of the settlers. Who cares that they churned butter? Who cares what they ate or where they slept or where they went to the bathroom? That is not essential information. And again, what can that do for your kid? When we talk about in this book, we talk about the 4 things that affect our happiness, our contentment, our purpose the most. It's faith, family, finances, or wealth, and fitness, health. Okay? How can knowing that the Pilgrims churned butter affect your life in any way? Now, if you want to be a cook and butter churning is a part of your life, and maybe you milk your cows, you make your own butter or something like that. Like that makes sense. It's part of your health, your eating. That makes total sense. But if you're trying to study the settlers, butter churning has nothing to do with it. You're just wasting your kids' time. And the sad thing is, when you get done with the whole study, they'll remember the butter churning because you made such a big deal out of it, and they'll forget like the essential details of what the settlers did and the obstacles that they overcame in settling the West. Okay, another example would be non-essential subjects. So we talked about how I took AP chemistry. I actually took that at prep school. It was a great class, and I learned a ton. It was totally overwhelmed. And I talked about how that applied to layers, how because I'd never seen chemistry before, and then all of a sudden it was just mountain, more than I ever knew to know. And then all of a sudden I never saw it again. I lost it. So I didn't learn it, retain any of it because of the layers. It wasn't taught to me in layers. The other problem is it's non-essential. So I learned all about chemistry, but I had nothing to do with it, no way to apply it. I never used it again. Outside of that, I still haven't used it. I mean, if we had done chemistry in the garden, that might be cool. You could test the pH levels or, of your soil and stuff like that. Like that would be essential. I would use that. I would retain that chemistry lesson because it'd be relevant in my everyday life. But when you learn, AP calculus or chemistry or something like that, most people are just doing that to impress the colleges. It's not because it's useful information. And that's why kids don't remember any of it. Like I took calculus. I don't know if I could solve a calculus problem today. Took AP chemistry. I did well in it. I don't know anything about chemistry anymore. It's all gone. And it's because I never saw it again. And so we have to really think about that. Like, is what I'm teaching, am I just teaching this because the schools do it, because the colleges are impressed by it, or is it because it's actually going to affect my children's life outside of academia, their faith, their family, their finances, their fitness? Chemistry is an important subject, but I would tie it into cooking, I tie it into gardening, unless you want to be a chemist, unless you want to go into science. Then it's different. When you go that career path, you'll have to know more. But see the difference? Everybody takes a language. That's another crazy thing that people do. They'll maybe Spanish makes sense if you live in the South or something like that, like in Texas, and there's a lot of Hispanic people, or you want to go to missions in South America. That kind of makes sense, Spanish. Maybe Chinese, I don't know, because the world, there's so many Chinese people, but like people are taking French and stuff. For what purpose? In case you take a vacation there someday? Like, have you ever run into I'm French. I'm not anymore, but that's my heritage. I don't know any French. What could I do with it? Who would I talk to with French? I don't live in France. If I need to go to France someday and I need to speak in French, I can learn that later in life. But why are we teaching that to kids? to impress a college because we think it's academic? Are we thinking about what we're teaching our kids? And the problem with that is, like, I guess 3 or 4 years of Spanish in high school. I can't speak any Spanish because I had never had an opportunity to speak it outside of. I would have had to literally go look for people to talk to. So it's pointless. It's irrelevant. It's not essential. Unless, again, you live in a population where there's a lot of Spanish people, then maybe that would make sense. So we have to think about what is essential if we want our kids to retain it. If you're just blindly teaching, following the public school model, your kids won't retain in it. They'll be just like the other kids. And those kids aren't stupid. They were pumped full of information that they never needed to know. Totally irrelevant to their lives. And they were taught it in layers, or not in layers. They were taught it in blocks, so they didn't see it again. And of course, we talked about how the public schools teach in the least effective way through reading. Okay, we talked about why reading is the least effective, why you kids have to read, how wisdom was handed down through books. But if you really want to know something, you have to progress up the learning pyramid. Listening is the most passive. It's the least effective. Then you have reading. Then you have observation. Then you have practice. Then you have doing. Then you have teaching. I might have missed one, I don't remember, but teaching is the highest form. If you want your kids to retain stuff, they have to teach. And in public school, you don't teach, you listen, you regurgitate. It'd be so much better at prep school. A lot of times we would do presentations, we would present the chapter to the class, we would actually teach each other. We had peer groups to teach each other. And it wasn't to help the other peers. I mean, it was to help struggling peers. Sometimes you go and mentor them and teach them, but really it was to reiterate to ourselves by teaching. So that's how you teach for retention. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. My kid the other day, Colton, all my kids know how to cook bread now, but my son the other day learned in one day, he probably cooks the best bread in the family now besides grandpa. So he's right up there. He learned it in one day. He learned a recipe, and now because he's able to make it every day and we can eat it, it's a real skill that he'll use every day. He's actually retained it. He knows the recipe now. He'll know for the rest of his life as he keeps making this stuff because it's useful. Where you have a subject like calculus, I don't even know how I would find out. I don't even know how to apply calculus in the real world. For me, it was just all theory. I wouldn't even know what to do with calculus unless I became an engineer or something. So really think about what you're teaching kids. Is this essential? We only have so much time with our kids. There's no time to waste. In what I call in the book a trivial pursuit. The game shows now, it's the game trivia, and then you have all those, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Jeopardy or something. And we're so impressed by those people, like, man, those people are so smart. Do you know what trivial means? It means non-essential, useless facts and information. So literally, like, if you're the winner of trivia, you're the big loser in life. It means that you've filled your head with non-essential details, irrelevant information. The only place anybody's impressed, the only time you get any money is if you can win Jeopardy. You're wasting your kid's life. So if you want to raise your children for greatness, you need to be sharp like a sword, be able to cut through all the nonsense. I've already talked about how there's too many books. I'm not impressed with people who've read 1 million books. You're not smart. There's only so many good books out there. Read them, and then read them again and again and again and again. That's how you retain it. You should read the Bible 10 times. You should have read War and Peace a few times. Those are amazing books. You got kids reading Goosebumps, like every book in the Goosebumps series. What can that do for them? That's entertainment. That's not essential. That's not education. Okay? Again, I'm not saying you can't read Goosebumps or Harry Potter, but let's not pretend that that's educational. Let's not be impressed with that. There are essential classic books every kid should be reading more than once, and that's how you retain it too. You don't move on. You're not force feeding 1 million facts into your kid's head. Boil it down to the essential and master those. It was really interesting when I went through this special forces qualification course, most of it. Okay, I have a knee injury. It didn't end well. But I got selected for the Green Berets. I went through that training. It was amazing because you think when you get there, you think like you're gonna become like James Bond, like flipping off of buildings and whatever. It was amazing how when you get there, you go back to the shooting range and you're mastering the basics. You're dry firing. Just learning trigger pull all day long. There's an art to trigger pull, believe it or not. And I remember thinking like how that's so interesting. You think like the top level, these guys are going to be like genius, whatever. And it's like, no, they are genius, but they master the basics. That's what our kids need to be. They need to master the basics. Master the multiplication table. Say it inside out. Understand percents in your head. That kind of stuff is basic math. Master the basics. Don't worry about calculus and all that other stuff. Master the basics, the stuff you'll use every day. I think about percentages. You think about multiplication stuff all the time. Every day you use that kind of stuff. Or you should be able to. That's how you become elite. I do jiu-jitsu. I train in jiu-jitsu. I'm a pretty high belt. I've been doing it for a long time. Okay, but even a black belt will tell you, you master the basics. You look at the jiu-jitsu tournaments, the black belts, stuff like that, they're still using an armbar, and we teach armbar day one. You can't master an armbar in a day one. You can do armbars your whole life, and you continue to improve your armbar every single day. And the guys who win are the guys who master those basics. The fancy moves always impress people. It's super cool, but they hardly ever work. You master the basics, and that's what we should be doing. We should be mastering the essential, and our children will retain that, and they'll have it at their at access. It'll be in their memory. They can recall it at any time. That's so much more important. My kids may not know as much as every other kid. They do. They may not have learned as much as all the other kids. I don't know, but they are mastering. What they know, they know. They've retained it. It's useful. So anyway, that's your tip for today. That's essential. That's in the book. There's a whole lot more in the book, and this one is really an essential book. People who have read it, I actually had somebody, the reason I'm bringing this up again is I'm actually selling more of Revealing School, an old book I wrote 5 years ago. I didn't even have this thing edited or anything. I just winged this thing, and it's been so powerful. I'm actually selling more right now because of the crazy in the world than I am of the new book, Education. And somebody contacted me the other day, and they're like, I can't put this down. It's a page turner. It's incredible. You just blew my mind. But it just talks about a lot of these things that we're talking about in here about the essentials. It'll show you why public education doesn't work. In this book, I think I have a chapter called Learning Proof Schools. And it's talking about how the schools are literally learning proofed. You couldn't have designed a system where children would retain less. They couldn't have, it makes you question their motives because they literally have come up with a system that has mastered the art of teaching nothing. A system that has mastered the art of when a kid gets through, he's literally retained nothing of any use to his life. And you know that. They tell you that. They say if you don't go on to college, you'll work at McDonald's. That should tell you what 13 years of your education did for you. You mastered the non-essential. It's not going to affect your life. You're not going to be richer for it. You were really in public education, the purpose, I'll tell you about it. And this is why it's really hitting a nerve right now, is the communists are overthrowing our country. People are starting to wake up to what public education is. And it's first of all, it was a capitalist system and a communist system, but it was to remove the children from the home so that parents could become human resources. They thought, well, if we could just get women to the workplace, we'll double our GDP. That'd be amazing. But we got these kids to deal with. Let's stick them into school. We'll call it education. That's one. The second thing, which is a really interesting chapter, this is probably my favorite chapter. It talks about the power of education, the power of knowledge, and gives an example of Alexander the Great. You should read it. And they understood what education was, and they understood how important it was to keep the masses ignorant. In fact, Alexander the Great's tutor, Aristotle, published a book after he taught Alexander. And Alexander writes him this hateful letters like, thanks a lot, jerk. Everything you taught me is now useless because everybody knows it. And then Aristotle writes him back. He's like, don't worry. They won't understand the book unless they've been personally tutored by me. They're going to read it and not have any use. It's only for people who've been taught by me. It's a manual for people like you, Just reassuring Alexander that don't worry, you have elite knowledge. Well, when the Industrial Revolution happened and the printing press and knowledge became just cheap, anybody could access it. They had to divine a new system of keeping people ignorant, and so that they could continue to dominate society because knowledge is power. And they came up with public education. And I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds absolutely insane until you read the book. It's well documented. You can't unsee school after you read the book. You'll never look at public education. People right now are freaking out. Some people, it's really funny. The liberals should love education because it's the indoctrination system for them. But they want the schools shut. Now you see conservatives like, we need to open these schools. We need we have to keep learning. It's like, I don't care that the public schools are shut down. I think the online learning is great for kids. They'll be distanced from the classroom where all that, the violence and the bullying and just that horrible toxic social environment happens. So it's great. I think everybody should homeschool. You can do so much better. And that journey, that conviction that you should be homeschooling is what this book is about. So Revealing School, if you haven't read it, you can start with either one. They're self-contained books. But they do kind of build on each other. This is the first one. Get public school out of your system. It's an illegitimate model. It's illegitimate methods, illegitimate subjects. Public school is a fraud. And then the second book is this is where we start building the foundation of an elite education. And then the next book is more important. It's character. And character, it's going to blow you away because everybody thinks that character training is like teaching your kid to be nice or kind. And that's what most moms are doing. They're teaching their kids to be nice and kind. My character he's going to be, I think it's 270 pages right now. It's a big, thick book. Character is, it's a big deal. It's not niceness training. It's a big deal. And it's more important than math. It's more important than reading when it's in terms of your kid's success. If your kid was illiterate, but he had courage, if he had conviction, if he knew how to lead, things like that, that's way more important. He can always teach himself to read. But character, courage, things like that, those are formed over time. and those really will set kids apart from other kids. The elite prep schools, if I was totally honest with you, I would love to say like I've got this superior knowledge and education because I went to an elite prep school for a while. The truth is they were okay. I mean, the academics was great, sure, but you could tell the focus of the elite prep school, it's a finishing school for character. Character is the focus, especially at the military boarding school I went to, Fort Union Military Academy. Character was king. That's really why we were there, is to shape strong character. That always leads to greatness. So anyway, that's it. That was a ramble. That was not what I was talking about today. Today we're talking about essential. Thank you guys for joining me. If you guys have questions, your questions are always front and center. That's what I go to first. So that's why we're talking about retention. We talked about layers and the learning pyramid essential is because Sharon asked that question. If you guys have other questions, ask me. If you want to know what's going on, I hate to even go there because that's the last book I'm going to be writing. I've already started writing it. I've got about 200 pages 150 pages, I guess, on the last book, The Enemy or Evil, I don't know what I'm going to call it. But if you want to know what's going on, the Black Lives Matter Antifa, it's in the book. The same people who are doing all that crazy in the street are the same people who created the public education system. I briefly mentioned in here, I didn't actually get to the bottom of it. I didn't really know who those people were. I traced it back to communism and socialism, but I didn't really know who they were, and that's coming. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer it. Anyway, thank you guys so much. Ask your questions, and we'll talk to you next week. Talk to you later.